there's a good chance you've seen every episode of The Golden Girls more than once. You know the cheesecake, you know the lanai, you know every single picture at Sicily. But even the most devoted fans have missed things hiding right in plain sight. In the set design, in the casting history, in the costumes, and tucked quietly inside some of your most familiar episodes. Here are 20 small details you missed in The Golden Girls.
Right away.
Me too. You know, before I met you two girls, I was never up this late.
Detail 20. There were only 3 chairs at the kitchen table. On purpose. That kitchen table is one of the most iconic settings in the history of American television. 4 women, mountains of cheesecake, and 7 seasons of late-night conversations that could cover anything from love and loss to the politics of the day. The table became so central to the show that it almost functioned as a 5th character, a gathering place that the audience came to rely on as much as the women themselves. But look closely at almost any scene filmed there, and you'll notice something. There were only ever 3 chairs pulled up to that table, not 4. 3. This wasn't a prop error or a forgotten detail from the set decorators. It was a deliberate production decision made specifically for the camera. With 4 actresses seated tightly together around a small kitchen table, the camera would have struggled. Someone would always have their back to the lens, or the frame would be too crowded to catch the facial expressions that made the show work. With 3 chairs, directors could rotate which characters were seated and which were standing or moving, giving every actress proper space on screen. Bea Arthur always got the center chair. Her height made her naturally the focal point of any grouping, and her deadpan reactions, those slow turns, those long pauses, needed to land cleanly for the audience. The other women shifted around depending on the scene and which character needed to exit the kitchen. On the rare occasions when all 4 had to be seated at the same time, a tall stool would be pulled to the edge of the group, just barely in frame. It was a quiet, practical workaround that most viewers sat through hundreds of times without ever clocking.
I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you did the right thing by telling Dorothy about Elliot. What about Elliot?
Detail 19. The kitchen set was a hand-me-down. While we're still in that kitchen, here's something that might genuinely surprise you. That set was not designed for the Golden Girls at all. The production didn't build it. They inherited it. The kitchen belonged to a short-lived NBC sitcom called It Takes Two, which had aired in 1982 and starred Richard Crenna and Patty Duke Aston as a dual-career couple. He was a doctor, she was a lawyer, with 2 teenage children. The show was canceled after a single season. Rather than tear down the set, the production simply preserved it. When the Golden Girls came along 3 years later, the kitchen was still there, and the team worked with what they had. It had been a professional couple's modern kitchen before it became the late-night gathering place of 4 retired women sharing a Miami home. The countertops, the cabinets, the layout, all of it came from another show entirely. The producers dressed it differently, added the warmth and color that fit the new series, and that was that. For 7 seasons, millions of people felt completely at home in a kitchen that was, in a sense, recycled television history.
Rocco did admit he robbed a bank. It's my fault. He thought the only way he...
Detail 18. The house was in Los Angeles, not Miami. The show placed the women firmly in Miami, Florida. The address given in various episodes was 6151 Richmond Street. Warm weather, palm trees, Gulf breezes, the whole sun-soaked atmosphere was central to the show's identity. Miami felt right for 4 women living their best lives in retirement. But the exterior shots of the house, the ones used as establishing visuals throughout the series, were filmed at a property located at 245 North Saltaire Avenue in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. The real house has 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and is nearly 2,900 square feet. Its estimated value in recent years has been placed well above $5 million. Every time you watched the opening credits or saw a cut to the outside of the house between scenes, you were looking at a Los Angeles property that had nothing to do with Florida. A replica of the exterior was also constructed at what was then known as Disney MGM Studios in Orlando for use during the theme park's years of operation. So across the full run of the show, the fictional Miami home existed in 2 states, and neither of them was Florida.
You knew?
No, I didn't. Frankly, I'm a little embarrassed.
Detail 17. Bea Arthur hated cheesecake. For a show so deeply associated with cheesecake that the dessert practically became its mascot, it is a particular irony that one of its 4 stars genuinely disliked the thing. Bea Arthur had no taste for cheesecake and made no secret of it to her co-stars and the crew. The late-night kitchen scenes that audiences loved most were, for her, an endurance exercise. The scenes frequently required multiple takes, not always because something went wrong, but because live tapings in front of an audience meant the actresses were eating through everyone. The other 3 women reportedly had no problem with this arrangement. Arthur tolerated it. It adds a subtle texture to those scenes when you know. Dorothy always seemed slightly removed from the table's warm ritual, more observer than participant, leaning back, watching the others with that dry expression. That distance felt like character. It turns out some of it was just Bea Arthur waiting for the take to end so she could stop eating cheesecake. The cheesecake itself became such an embedded symbol of the show that it outlasted the original broadcast by decades. Bakeries named items after the series. Cafes held themed nights around it. All of that built on a dessert that one of the 4 women eating it on screen couldn't stand.
Kind of black. What does that mean, kind of black?
Detail 16. Dorothy's earrings were all clip-ons. Dorothy's Bornak wore some of the boldest, most dramatic statement earrings in 1980s television. Big architectural pieces, oversized drops, heavily embellished designs that made her look like a woman who took up space unapologetically, which was exactly the point. The earrings were part of Dorothy's armor. What almost no one knew was that every single pair was a clip-on. Bea Arthur had never had her ears pierced and had no intention of changing that. Costume designer Judy Evans sourced clip-on versions of each piece throughout the run of the series. Arthur genuinely loved the visual drama the earrings brought to the character. She called them crazy in more than one interview, and she meant that affectionately. The downside was purely physical. By the end of a long filming day, the pressure of clip-ons worn for hours would leave her ears numb and sore. She mentioned the discomfort more than once, but never asked for smaller or more subtle jewelry. For 7 seasons, Dorothy's ears ached in service of Dorothy's look.
I thought the little woman had you eating things like sprouts and roots and those green things.
Detail 15. Dorothy's last name came from the stage manager, Dorothy's Bornak. It's not a common name, and it wasn't invented from thin air. Series creator Susan Harris named the character after a real person who was on the crew, Kent Zbornak, who served as stage manager on the Golden Girls for the entire run of the series. From the pilot episode to the finale, Harris and Kent Zbornak had first worked together back in 1977 on the sitcom Soap. She liked his surname enough to hold on to it for nearly a decade, and when she was developing Dorothy's character, she quietly paid tribute to him by giving his name to her sharpest, most sardonic creation. Kent Zbornak was there every single week on set, standing just off camera, while the character carrying his surname delivered lines that would be quoted for decades. It's one of those small, affectionate gestures that the production world is full of, and most audiences never know about. The name itself became so associated with the character that most people who heard it would immediately picture Bea Arthur, never suspecting there was a real Kent Zbornak who spent 7 years making sure the whole production ran on time.
Boy, your father sure looked stupid.
Stupid, Ma. This was one of your favorite people.
Detail 14. Estelle Getty was younger than Bea Arthur. This is the one that always stops people cold, even people who have known the show for years. Sophia Petrillo was Dorothy Zbornak's elderly mother on the series. Sophia was written as a woman in her early to mid-80s. Dorothy was somewhere in her mid to late 50s. The generational gap was written into every single scene they shared. In real life, the actress playing the mother was younger than the actress playing the daughter. Estelle Getty was born on July 25, 1923. Bea Arthur was born on May 13, 1922. Getty was roughly a year younger than her television child. To play Sophia convincingly, Getty sat in the makeup chair for approximately 45 minutes before every filming day while the team worked to age her, adding texture to the skin, adjusting her posture with carefully placed costuming, transforming her into an elderly Sicilian woman with Sicilian stubbornness to match. The challenge became even more complicated when Season 2 began. Getty had undergone a facelift during the summer hiatus between seasons, and she came back looking noticeably younger than she had at the end of Season 1. The makeup team had to recalibrate. They managed it, and most viewers never noticed the adjustment.
Do you see what you've done? You've upset Kim.
Detail 13. The theme song almost belonged to Bette Midler. Thank You for Being a Friend is one of the most instantly recognizable theme songs in the history of American television. 4 notes in, and you know exactly where you are. But the show came very close to opening every week with an entirely different song. Producers had originally reached out about licensing Friends, a song recorded by Bette Midler, for use in the theme. The licensing fees came back too high, and the idea was dropped. Sometime after that, one of the producers recalled a song by the singer-songwriter Andrew Gold, Thank You for Being a Friend, which Gold had originally recorded and released in 1978. The lyrics were a natural fit. They licensed the song and brought in a session singer named Cynthia Fee to record a new version specifically for the show. The recording session was booked for an hour. Fee finished in 1 or 2 takes. The whole thing took somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. She walked out that afternoon not expecting to think about it again. It felt like a small, forgettable job. Because of union royalty agreements, every broadcast of the theme generated a payment to Fee. The show ran for 7 seasons in prime time, then went into decades of syndication and streaming. That afternoon's recording session, done quickly, done well, and largely forgotten by Fee herself in the moment, turned into one of the most quietly lucrative single jobs in television history.
But from the fact that the murder weapon was dropped to the left of the victim, we can deduce that the murderer...
Detail 12. NBC didn't want Bea Arthur in the show. It is genuinely hard to picture the Golden Girls without Bea Arthur at its center. Dorothy's towering posture, her volcanic sarcasm, her moments of unexpected warmth, all of it was essential. And yet, the network tried to keep her out. Susan Harris had written the role of Dorothy with Arthur specifically in mind, drawing on their earlier work together on Maude in the 1970s. When Harris brought the idea to the network, then NBC president Brandon Tartikoff pushed back. His concern was Arthur's audience appeal score, known in the industry as a Q score. By the network's measurement, Arthur was recognizable, but not considered warm or likable enough for a show that needed audiences to root for its characters. Her association with the politically charged Maude was part of his hesitation. Broadway legend Elaine Stritch was also considered seriously for the role. She lost the producer's confidence during her audition when she improvised extensively and used profanity on the stage. Not the audition strategy one might choose when trying to land a network sitcom. It was Rue McClanahan who eventually settled the matter. She and Arthur had been friends from their time on Maude, and she called Arthur and made a direct, simple case for why she needed to take the part. Arthur came around, the network came around, and the character that Susan Harris had always imagined finally became the character everyone saw on screen.
Not just because you got caught in the rain.
Detail 11. Betty White and Rue McClanahan swapped character types. When The Golden Girls was being developed and cast, the creative team had an interesting problem. Both Betty White and Rue McClanahan were candidates for roles, but the parts they seemed naturally suited for were the wrong ones. McClanahan had spent years playing sweeter, more wholesome characters. White, on the other hand, had recently played Sue Ann Nivens on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, a character who was deceptively charming on the surface and sexually forward and manipulative underneath. Given those histories, the logical casting would have been White as Blanche and McClanahan as Rose. The producers deliberately went the other way. They cast against type, putting White into the innocent, guileless Rose Nyland and giving McClanahan the sexually confident Blanche Devereaux. The choice gave both women something fresh to play and kept audiences from settling too quickly into assumptions about the characters. The contrast between their previous TV personas made the inversion all the more satisfying for viewers who knew both women's earlier work.
I never should have let that filthy barnyard beast in my house in the first place. He ruins my clothes, smells up the whole house.
Detail 10. Blanche got to keep all her clothes. Rue McClanahan arrived at contract negotiations with a very specific request. She wanted to keep Blanche's wardrobe, every piece of it. For the full run of the series, the clause was written in and the production honored it. Season after season, as the costume department built out Blanche's wardrobe, the silk blouses, the dramatic evening wear, the low-cut dresses that announced her arrival before she said a word. McClanahan knew it was all coming home with her. By the time the show ended in 1992, she had filled 13 closets with Blanche's custom-made clothing. The collection became a significant part of her personal estate, and when items from it were offered for sale years later, fans and collectors paid close attention. Those clothes weren't just costumes. They were 7 seasons worth of one of television's most memorable characters, preserved in fabric and sequins.
How about a shot of gin with a beer back?
Detail 9. The 5th character who vanished after episode 1. If you came to the show through reruns or streaming, you may have started from season 1, episode 2, without ever knowing there was a pilot that introduced a character who was never seen again. In the very first episode of The Golden Girls, the house had a 5th resident, a gay male housekeeper named Coco Davis, played by actor Charles Levin. Coco was conceived as an intended series regular, a presence in the household who would serve as a kind of counterpoint to the 4 women. He appeared in the pilot, made an impression, and was written out with no in-show explanation. Audiences who tuned in for episode 2 simply found him gone. The behind-the-scenes reasons were twofold. First, NBC had expressed reservations about including a recurring gay character in a mainstream primetime sitcom. This was 1985, and the network was cautious about that kind of pushback from affiliates and advertisers. Second, and more decisively, Estelle Getty's performance in the pilot had been so unexpectedly strong that the producers decided to build further around Sophia as the true fourth lead. Expanding Sophia's role made Coco's function redundant. Levin was let go, the character was quietly dropped, and the show moved forward with the four-woman structure that would define it for the rest of its run.
What dowry check?
Your father gave us a check for $2 million when we agreed to let you marry Phil.
Detail 8. Sophia's fear of death. Off camera, Sophia Petrillo had a running relationship with mortality that made her the show's resident philosopher on the subject. She attended funerals, delivered eulogies, made dark jokes, and sat in the living room of a house full of aging women without flinching. The character wore the subject lightly. Estelle Getty, the woman inside that performance, genuinely feared death in a way that made those scenes difficult to film. The phobia was real and serious. Episodes centered on funerals or end-of-life situations created visible discomfort for her, and the cast and crew were aware of it. The production was sensitive to this, without drawing attention to it publicly, and Getty pushed through nonetheless. There's a kind of quiet courage in that. Every scene where Sophia delivered a perfectly timed comment at someone's bedside or funeral was a scene where Getty was working directly against a deep personal fear. The performance didn't show it. The character seemed like the most comfortable person in the room. That gap between what Getty felt and what she gave the camera is its own kind of craft.
Anything new?
Nothing. Come on now, what did you do? You've never been here before. What do you think?
Detail 7. Sick and Tired was based on the creator's real life. The two-part episode in Season 5 titled Sick and Tired is among the most serious storylines the show ever attempted. Dorothy spends months trying to get doctors to take her symptoms seriously, cycling through dismissals and misdiagnoses before finally receiving a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome from a specialist. The emotional core of the episode is Dorothy's exhaustion, not just physical, but the particular exhaustion of being a woman who isn't believed. What viewers weren't told at the time was that the episode was written directly from the experience of series creator Susan Harris. Harris had been living with chronic fatigue syndrome herself, and the frustration that Dorothy voices, the condescension from physicians, the suggestions that the symptoms were anxiety or stress, the long road to being taken seriously, was drawn from Harris's own real-life medical journey. Harris used the platform of one of the most watched shows on television to put that experience in front of millions of people in a way that felt personal and specific, rather than like a public service announcement. For many women watching at home who had dealt with similar dismissals from doctors, the episode felt like someone had finally said the thing they'd been unable to say themselves.
Great, you old geezer, the sun's reflecting off the sand.
Who are you calling an old geezer?
What am I, Kreskin? How should I know what your name is?
Detail 6. Getty suffered from severe stage fright. Of the 4 lead actresses on the show, Estelle Getty was the least seasoned television performer when the Golden Girls began. Bea Arthur had Maude. Betty White had decades of live television going back to the early 1950s. Rue McClanahan had an extensive career across stage and television. Getty's biggest prior credential was a stage role in a production that had run off Broadway. The gap in experience was something Getty felt acutely. Rue McClanahan described a pattern that repeated throughout the series. By Thursday dress rehearsals, a visible change would come over Getty. A tension would settle in, a kind of dark preoccupation that her castmates recognized as pure anxiety. By Friday tape nights, in front of the live studio audience, she would sometimes freeze, losing her lines or her timing in ways that hadn't happened in rehearsal. In a 1988 interview, Getty spoke about it herself. She said that working alongside Arthur and White every week made her feel like a fraud. someone who didn't belong in the same room, waiting for the audience to eventually figure that out. The fear never fully left her over the course of the series. She won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Television Series, Musical, or Comedy in 1988. For that same performance she was convinced wasn't good enough.
How many more chances do you think you're going to have to buy her shoes? Oh, what I would give to be able to buy my mother's shoes one more time.
Detail 5. Blanche's middle name changed between seasons. Devoted viewers who paid close attention to names and details may have caught this one, though you'd have to be watching carefully across multiple seasons to spot it. In the episode Wham, Bam, Thank You, Mammy, Blanche is addressed by her full maiden name by her former mammy, Blanche Marie Hollingsworth. Her middle name clearly stated Marie. The character's middle name later became Elizabeth. In the episode Hey Look Me Over, Blanche pulls out an old personal diary, and the cover carries the initials BED, standing for Blanche Elizabeth Devereaux. The change was never acknowledged in the show or explained by the writers. It simply happened. The most likely reason is that the writing team either didn't have the earlier detail in front of them or made the switch because the initials BED were too good a joke to pass up given Blanche's particular reputation. The show had a well-known tendency to prioritize a strong laugh over airtight continuity, and this was one of the cleaner examples of that trade-off.
We need a globe and a Tatler and a Midnight Star and an Enquirer, and I guess maybe one serious.
Detail 4. The show introduced a word to most of America. Before the Golden Girls began airing in 1985, the word lanai was not part of the everyday vocabulary of most Americans living outside of Florida or Hawaii. A lanai, in architectural terms, is an open-air porch or veranda, usually with a concrete floor, an awning overhead, and sometimes enclosed with screens along the sides. In warm weather states, lanais are a standard feature of residential homes. For most of the country, the word was simply unfamiliar. The show made the lanai central to the characters' daily life. They sat there in the mornings, had serious conversations there in the evenings, and used the space the way another show might use a living room or a front stoop. It was their outdoor extension of home, as familiar and essential as the kitchen table. The writers were aware early on that their national audience likely didn't know the word. They built in a short scene near the beginning of the series, in which Sophia asked Dorothy what a lanai was, giving Dorothy the opportunity to provide the definition and giving the audience the same information without it feeling like a lecture. Sophia's reply to Dorothy's explanation compared her to a soap opera character for using such a fancy word for a porch. Millions of viewers learned a new word that afternoon without noticing they'd been taught one.
Jerry, that's terrible.
I was having a few sips while I was rinsing out my underwear.
Detail 3. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was a fan. When the Golden Girls began airing in the United Kingdom, it connected with British audiences at every level, including, as it turned out, the royal family. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, became a genuine admirer of the series, and in 1988, she made an unusual personal request. She asked the 4 actresses to perform a live sketch at that year's Royal Variety performance in London. The cast agreed and traveled to London for the event. They performed 2 scenes drawn from the show's kitchen table conversations, with some minor adjustments made out of respect for the occasion. One line, however, survived into the final performance that might have surprised any formal observer. A Sophia joke touching on a widow's return to romance after her husband's death. The then 88-year-old Queen Mother was spotted laughing from the royal box. For a show set in suburban Miami, built around 4 American women navigating the later chapters of their lives, performing before royalty in a London theater was a detail that most fans on either side of the Atlantic never knew about. The show had quietly crossed every cultural and geographic boundary that anyone might have assumed would limit it.
Didn't cost that much.
Mr. Pfeiffer, we have already told you.
Detail 2. Bea Arthur wore slippers on set. Dorothy's Bornak dressed with a kind of practical authority. Structured clothes, those memorable earrings, shoes that communicated sensibility. The character looked like a woman who had stopped caring what other people thought and dressed exactly the way she wanted because of it. Behind the scenes, there was a quietly negotiated compromise in place. Bea Arthur had a well-known discomfort with wearing shoes on set. She found them restrictive and simply preferred not to wear them when she didn't have to. Whenever a scene was blocked in a way that kept her feet out of frame, she wore slippers instead of Dorothy's actual shoes. The crew accommodated this arrangement without any particular fuss. It was the kind of practical adaptation that develops naturally over a long production run. 7 years of filming means an enormous number of hours on a set, and the small comforts that performers find tend to stick. In Arthur's case, one of those comforts was working in soft shoes while delivering some of the sharpest lines in the script. Dorothy may have walked tall and dressed with authority, but her feet, at least, were comfortable. Detail 1. Both Arthur and White lost their mothers during season 1. This last detail is quieter than the others. It doesn't involve a set decision or a costume clause or a continuity slip. It's something that happened in real life while the show was being made, and it happened to both of them at the same time. During the filming of season 1, both Bea Arthur and Betty White lost their mothers. 2 of the 4 lead actresses were grieving simultaneously while delivering comedic performances in front of a live studio audience week after week. When the news reached the production team, they offered to pause filming entirely. Director Lex Pasaris and the producers were fully prepared to shut down for however long the women needed. Both Arthur and White declined. Each of them, independently, gave the same answer. They needed to work. So, they came back. They sat down at that 3-chaired kitchen table, they delivered their lines, they made the audience laugh, and they kept going. That's the detail underneath all the other details. When people talk about the warmth of the Golden Girls, the way it feels different from other sitcoms, the sense that something real was happening between those 4 women, this is part of what they're feeling. Not everything that looks like a performance is only a performance. Those were 20 small details you missed in The Golden Girls. 7 seasons, 180 episodes, 4 unforgettable women, and after all these years, there are still layers to find. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you there.